Good morning. They all sounded sluggish on that one. Let's try it again. Good morning. Much better. Great to see everyone here this morning. If you've got your Bibles, turn to 1 Kings chapter 11 and put a finger in 2 Chronicles, around chapter 10, and we might be going back and forth between those two. There's something we're going to do before we get to that, though, but just have those ready. In the way of announcements, we just need to remember all of those that are on the sick list, those that have lost loved ones recently. Be with Brother Terry in your prayers as he continues to improve but still has some pain, and others. If you got the email and about one of Holly's friends, Jessica, that had attended here off and on, her son that had been misdiagnosed in Montgomery was at UAB. He had cellulitis that had made it to the bone because they had him on the wrong medication, but he is improving, so everything should work out there. Anyone else that we need to, and those traveling, and it's good to see a lot back that were on the sick list. So anyone else? Brother Tyler, would you lead us in a prayer then, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you today. We thank you for the many blessings you put upon us, Lord, as individuals and as a congregation. And Lord, we thank you that you've given us the ability to come here and study a portion of your word. And we thank you that you've given us the want to and the drive to come this morning. Help us continue to come as we need to, Lord. Help us keep an open heart so the words that you have provided for us will pierce them, and so we can be a shining light for you. Please be with those that have been mentioned here sick. In your name we pray. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. This thing's supposed to be working. Change slide, Jay. There we go. Delayed. We're going to be talking about the divided kingdom for the next 2 quarters. Last Sunday, we had gone through an introduction, and Brother Terry had mentioned also that if you needed, if this was sent out on email, the books that we're using, so you can use your electronic devices to get the lessons. But if you can't do that or need some help, let Brother Terry or I know, and we'll either print them off week by week or the whole thing all at one time. The book that I'm using is 116 pages long, and I'm not sticking strictly by the book, but all the questions come out of that book, and it's a real good roadmap. So since we're talking, and we got through lesson 1 last week, and I'm going to do my best to stay on track with the lessons so we can work in an orderly fashion. The lesson today, lesson 2, is called The Rending of the Kingdom. And that's where we go into 1 Kings chapter 11 starting, and 2 Chronicles 10. But since we're talking about a divided kingdom, at one time there was a united kingdom. We discussed that earlier. But for a kingdom to divide, we need to know what is being divided. So what event took place about 500 years before the kingdom divided? Now, we pointed out last Sunday, and we're not dogmatic on dates, but the kingdom divided about 931 BC. 500 years before that would put it in the mid 1400s, 1400 to 1450 range. So what event was taking place during that period of time? How about the Exodus out of Egypt? People were now traveling. They were on their way to the land of Canaan, which is where they're going to be when they divide up. So, how many tribes made that journey from Egypt to the promised land? Now, some of you are going to say I'm throwing in a trick question here, but it's really not. How many tribes made the journey from Egypt to the land of Canaan? All of them. That is spot on biblical, all of them. Now, can you give me a number? I'm sorry? 13. How do you come up with 13? The tribe of Levi is not going to be given a portion of the territory. Jay, you can change slides now and we can eliminate, change slides and we'll stay on that one. Because I thought everybody was going to say 12, and I was going to show the 12 tribes and then the tribe of Levi. So 12 tribes plus Levi made the journey from Egypt to the land of Canaan. 500 years later, don't change slides yet. 500 years later, last week we discussed that one tribe was given to Rehoboam, him being of the tribe of Judah, but in essence, Benjamin went along with that. And then we said that there were 10 tribes in what was called the Northern Territory. Name the 10 tribes. Less Judah and Benjamin. I thought that's what you was going to say. Change slides, Jay, and I'm going to ask you, what about the tribe of Simeon? Because if you notice the map and the Bible, the land of Simeon is located within the boundaries of Judah. It is surrounded by Judah. How does it work that Simeon is associated with the northern tribe when they are totally surrounded? Now, let's look at the map farther. If we go up and count the tribes, we have more than 10 tribes. If you start at the top, you've got Dan, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Zebulun, Issachar, Manasseh, Gad, Ephraim, Dan, Benjamin, Reuben. How many tribes are that? That's 12 tribes. Right? Wait a minute now. 2 tribes are called Dan, and 2 tribes are called Manasseh. If we bring those back down, what do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, counting Simeon. There is a Bible, pardon?
2 tribes that were split by
Okay. Let me do it this way. Let's take Dan first. Well, no, let's take Manasseh first, because we know what happened to Manasseh, right? We had, when they started to enter the land of Canaan, half the tribe of Manasseh wanted to stay on the east side of the river, east side of the border, and not go in, and they were granted that permission if they would go along and fight so everybody could get their inheritance, which happened. So Manasseh, and then when the other half tribe of Manasseh did cross, they were given territory. So you've got two, and I'm going to use the phrase authorized tribes. You got an East Manasseh and a West Manasseh, basically. Now, let's go to Dan. What happened to Dan? If you'll go into Joshua chapter 19, Joshua chapter 19, at verse 40, it says, "And the seventh lot came out for the tribe of the children of Dan according to their families." And now if you'll skip down to verse 47, "And the coast of the children of Dan went out too little for them. Therefore the children of Dan went up to fight against Lashem and took it and smote it with the edge of the sword and possessed it and dwelt therein and called Lashem Dan after the name of Dan their father." And then if you'll then go over to Judges, in the book of Judges, chapter 18, verse 27 through 29, says, "And they took the things which Micah had made, and the priest which he had, and came unto Lachish, unto a people that were quiet and secure, and they smote them with the edge of the sword, and burnt the city with fire. And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Zidon, and they had no business with any man, and it was in the valley that lieth by Beth-rahab. And they built a city and dwelt therein, and they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born unto Israel. Howbeit the name of the city was Laish at the first." Now, here's the way that I put those together based on the Bible. We know what happened to Manasseh. Now, when Dan was given their territory, which is the lower portion next to Benjamin, they wasn't happy. They went north, and they couldn't stop at Ephraim because that was a given by God location to the Ephraimites. They couldn't stop at Manasseh, Gad. They had to go to a location that was not going to be given to one of the tribes, which puts it up into where Dan, the second Dan, is Laish, which is into the Phoenician zone a little bit. But they took that territory. They wasn't given it. It wasn't in the original conscript, so to speak. So now you've got Dan at two locations. We know Manasseh's at two locations. But let's take Simeon also. Simeon being in the middle of the land of Judah, what happened over a 500-year period of time to the tribe of Simeon? Let's look at Genesis 49 and verse 7. Genesis 49 and verse 7. Now, just for reminder, Jacob here has called the kids together and going to talk to them one last time before he dies. And we won't go through all of it, but when we get to verse 7, it says, "Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them into Jacob and scatter them in Israel." The two that are being talked about here are Simeon and Levi. And why is Jacob unhappy with Simeon and Levi at this point? Recall what happened to their sister in Shechem, and what they did in retaliation, even hamstrung animals, made animals worthless for burden and things like that. So if you look at things in context, or at least I think if we look at things in context, going from what is said here, that Simeon was absorbed over that 500-year period of time into Judah. The same way as the Levites did not have their own territory, they were going to be absorbed and dispersed in amongst that when the time came. So if that is the case, then Judah, including Simeon, is just Judah. Benjamin is there, and Benjamin followed Judah because where is Jerusalem? Jerusalem is right on the border of the territory of Benjamin and Judah. Where did the first united king come from? Where did Saul come from? He was a Benjamite. Where did the second king, David, come from? And consequently, his son Solomon. Where did those two come from? The tribe of Judah. So if you do that, and then if you start on the east side and say Reuben, Gad, Manasseh, and then you come over to the west side where you've got Benjamin, Dan, Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, Zebulun, Naphtali, Asher, and Dan is counted twice there. Why would we only count Dan once and Manasseh twice? Or why did I only count him that way? I counted them that way because what did I say originally about it being two authorized territories? They were given territory. Whereas Dan conquered one. I've got everybody confused now. Brother Terry, can you help me out?
Dan got tired of being doorstep of the Philistines, so they decided to go far north.
Okay. But the dividing line for the north and the south territories, Judah, Benjamin, and Simeon being absorbed, that would take care of 3 of the tribes, which leaves 9. But then if you count Manasseh to the east and Manasseh to the west as both being given those territories, that would add up to 10. Do you at least see what I'm trying to do? Whether I'm right or wrong, do you at least see how it came into be? Or I came up with that? No? Okay. Does it matter? What matters is that there was a northern, the kingdom was torn apart. There was a northern territory and a southern territory. And if you look at the map, if you go to the north, they should have been the stronger of the groups because they had more territory and more people. However, they went into captivity first. Some of the logic behind that, and this is an overview that we'll get into more detail specifically later, but how many good kings were there in the northern territory? None. 0. As we get into it, this may sound like an overview, but as we get into it, you will find out that there was a king, maybe a son, maybe an assassination, and somebody else taking over. There was always the dogfight going on for that northern territory. Now, in the southern territory, Judah, Solomon, by authority, passed it on to Rehoboam, his son. His son passed it on. It stayed in the line of David all the way through. Were all of the kings of the south good? Were any of them good? There were some good and some bad. And Rehoboam was one of the bad ones to start off with, which we'll get into in just a minute. Now, once the territory decided to divide, does that mean that everybody stayed put? You have to sort of draw some conclusions on it, that if you look at the United States today, with what's been going on, with the pandemic going on, and which led to other stuff, there are certain states in the United States that are losing numbers by the thousands. People are leaving states and moving to another state, either for, well, most of it has to do with political reasons, and that can be broken down about preventing them from working or taxing or bad governing or whatever. But the states are today in our country, things are sort of in a turmoil. People are moving, they're leaving where they don't want to be and going to where they want to be. So you can think, I think, the same thing about what's going on with the kingdom dividing. Initially, when it divides, some people might have moved north, some people might have moved south. We see in the Old Testament where people move around all the time because of famine and security and different things. So, but the main point is that they divided, and why did they divide is what we're going to get into in today's lesson. Jay, you can shut that off now. Or is everybody totally confused? Have we got everybody confused? Brother Terry, you got anything to help unmuddy that water? Okay. Okay. So if we look at the first question, it says the rending of the kingdom, and this is in 1 Kings 11, starting with verse 26 and going through 40. It asked the question, who was Jeroboam? And that's more specifically found in chapter 11, verse 26. Who specifically was Jeroboam? I'm sorry? Solomon's servant, okay. He was the son of Nebat, an Ephrathite. His mother was Zeruiah. He was born in Zeradan. So, in essence, he was in the territory that would become the northern territory later. But at this particular time, before the division took place, he was one of Saul's servants or somebody in charge. The second question is, what position had Solomon given him? And that is in 27 and 28. Alicia said he was a servant, so what position did he have, looking at that verse 27 and 28? Okay. What is, since you answered that question so expeditiously, what was the charge of the house? What did it mean by the charge of the house of Joseph? What was that charge? What was the house of Joseph? That's where we're going. That in the reign of Solomon, each tribe had a month that they were supposed to take care of feeding things. Also, here's a good point to talk about. What was Solomon's reign like? Now, we know David was a man after God's own heart, and David did certain things. David was going to build the temple, but was prohibited from building the temple. That was going to be left to Solomon. But what else did Solomon do? Solomon was a builder, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but he built all kinds of houses and palaces and temples and rebuilt cities. And where'd he get all the money? Where'd he get all the labor? United States today, everybody wants to say it's free, it's from the federal government. Baloney. Where does the federal government get their money? It comes out of, it's us. Where did Solomon get his money? From the people. So there were three ways that the people furnished things to Solomon. First was just like us today. Every April, well, not last year, but mostly April 15th every year, what do we have to do? Make sure that we have sent in money, gold or silver or currency, or whatever. We have to satisfy our debt to the government by some type of coinage. In Solomon's day, what other ways did they have? And Alyssa's already told you one of them. They furnished product. And what was the third way? Labor. So back in that day, and when I was growing up, we did more bartering and labor exchange than we did money exchange. Nobody had money, but we had a little bit of time to work with other people and get things done. So in Solomon's day, since he was a builder, and we're going to find this a little bit later as we go through here, that the people were unhappy with Solomon because of the heavy burden that he had laid on them. And it all come down to the point of taxes. So when the verse here that was just read, when Jeroboam was given the charge of the house of Joseph, there's not a tribe by the name of Joseph, but was it just Ephraim, since that's where he was from? Or was it Ephraim and Manasseh? Because that was the two sons of Joseph. That's where that tribe came from. There's no place that's going to tell us. So we're not even going to supposition on that. It's just that Jeroboam was such a individual that Solomon put a great deal of trust in him, that he put him over at least one whole tribe to make sure that all the taxes and everything was taken care of.
It's almost like the way that Joseph was treated by Pharaoh. Jeroboam would have been under Joseph's level. You know, Joseph was kind of second-hand man in all of Egypt. Surely he had lieutenants under him that split that land up. You know, if we conjecture that, that's kind of the level that Jeroboam would be at this point. You know, Solomon, probably somebody else, but then Jeroboam would be kind of that third tier in charge of things.
A well-known, well thought of, get the job done person. A lot of responsibility, a lot of authority. Yes, sir. I don't have enough fingers on my hands to count the number of times that they went through that. But you are right. They would ask for something that they didn't need and didn't work out so well. Okay. Question 3 is the division of the kingdom prophesied by Ahijah. How was the prophecy symbolized? And this is in chapter 11, verses 29 and through 36. How did Ahijah tell Jeroboam, prophesy how things were going to take place? He had a garment and he tore that garment into how many pieces? 12 pieces. And then he said that all of it wouldn't be, but he would get 10 of those pieces. Okay. Just gave you the answer to the next one. How many tribes was Jeroboam to receive? 10. How many tribes would be left for Solomon? And that would be, or for Rehoboam, and that would be 2. And we've already discussed at great length about Benjamin coming in there and what happened to Simeon's group. Next question is, why was the kingdom to be divided? Now, this is a rather pointed question, and we've talked about heavy burdens and taxes and all of this other stuff, but it really boils down to one thing. And what is the one reason that the kingdom was now going to be divided? And that is in 1 Kings 11 and verse 33. That was a good portion of it, and that was a subcategory, I guess. What does idolatry fall under, though? Forsaking God. They had turned their back on God. They no longer followed God, and that could be through any number of things down the line. But basically, Solomon's main fault was that he violated what had been told to him in Deuteronomy. I think that's 17:17, about not marrying multiple wives, not acquiring money and all. So Solomon had accumulated a lot of money, a lot of wives, and then he had allowed the wives to turn him to idolatry. There's one interesting verse I want you to look at too, and this goes back just a little bit. It's if we go to 2 Chronicles 8 and verse 11. 2 Chronicles 8 and verse 11. And while you're turning over there are many people in the religious world today that talk about Solomon and his wives and all of them, that they converted to Judaism. I believe this next verse is going to point out very clearly that if some did, not all of them did. And it's particularly Pharaoh's daughter. If we'll look at 2 Chronicles 8 and verse 11, it says, and Solomon brought up the daughter of Pharaoh out of the city of David into the house that he had built for her, for he said, my wife shall not dwell in the house of David, king of Israel, because the places are holy, whereunto the ark of the Lord hath come. How can I draw the conclusion that she had not converted from that? She would have been defiling or desecrating that location, and doesn't say anything about his other wives, other concubines in the city, but oh yeah, absolutely.
For that reason, that's why God commanded not to take their own wives, and that they did turn his heart away to the point that he would build places for them, idols and temples for
And if you go specifically to chapter 11, 1 Kings chapter 11, starting with verse 1, but King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, woman of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites. And we'd pointed out last week that Zidonians was the same thing as Phoenicians. Jewish tradition has it that Solomon married one of Hiram's daughters, king of Tyre, which is a Phoenician, but that's just tradition. It doesn't say that. But it says that he married all these women from all these nations. And then if you go down to verse 4, it says, for it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods. If they had converted, they wouldn't be changing his heart to other gods. Verse 5, for Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. So, the main number one reason that the kingdom became divided was that they had forsaken God, and God was going to take care of it. Questions, comments?
That's the same Solomon that built the temple. His dad spent all that time getting everything together to build the temple. And now he's telling Jeroboam, the reason why I'm giving you 10 tribes is because of this. And Jeroboam immediately goes out and builds 2 idols. I know that's skipping ahead.
That's fine. You are correct. God gave them to Jeroboam, but Jeroboam did not follow suit. Next question is, when was the division to take place? We know that it started, the discontent started during the reign of Solomon, but when did the actual division take place? On the death of Solomon, when he appointed Rehoboam, his son, the king. But what was, we got a lot of sparks here of different things going on. But I suppose the question would be, what was the single most important catalyst that drove that wedge in for the division? If Rehoboam had listened to the counsel of the old folks that were around Solomon and lightened their load and helped them, they would not have done it. But Rehoboam ignored the counsel of the old people, went with his contemporaries, which put a grievous, it was going to be worse than with his father. And that was, to me, the catalyst, or you could say the final nail, or however you want to phrase it. But that was the final part that drove that wedge in to divide things. Well, I was going to try to avoid this topic today, but I'm going to get right in the middle of it anyway. Why do we have going on in the United States today what we have going on in the United States today? It's a grab for power based on what? Why are there people up there, and I sort of hinted at it earlier when I said the federal government did not make money. They are given money by the people. Everybody in the younger bracket that you want to talk to today and look at, they want a handout. It doesn't go just with the younger folks. Bernie Sanders was pushing free this, free that, free the other. And what they can't get through their thick head is there's nothing free. If I go buy a burger and fries and they say there's an advertisement going on where you buy this and you get free fries, did I get free fries? No, that was rolled into something else. And you look at all these TV ads that say you buy this and you'll get this free if you pay the fee. Wait a minute, what's the fee? How am I getting it free if I'm paying a fee? I mean, come on, folks.
This ideology is pushed, and it sounds good, but pay for what you get.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. It sounds great to not work and get. But here's the other half of that. You look at all these, and I'm going to pick on sports people now, the football players and the basketball players and all those sports figures that get multi-million-dollar contracts. How many of them appreciate it? Most of them waste it. We've got actors and actresses today that are living on the streets, basically, in poorhouses because they squandered all that money they was making because it was basically being given to them. If you don't have something invested, if you don't have your personal time invested in something, it doesn't mean as much. If you work for something, you're going to appreciate it more than if you're given something. Aren't you?
Well, Larry, we see this right here, the chapter previous to this talks about Solomon's navy, Solomon's gold, and Solomon's wealth, and the Queen of Sheba that comes in. It says that he gave to the Queen of Sheba abundantly from the king's bounty. I think is the way it's put in the King James. He just gave all this stuff to her. Well, it wasn't really his stuff, right? He didn't work for it. It was given to him because we see then in this later chapter, the people felt a great burden because of that. And I think it's important. He said nothing's free, and I know what you mean by that. Well, there's only one thing that's free, and that's salvation. Because the only king that knows how to act right is our Heavenly Father. And so the only time that you ever have a ruler and his people that are blessed and in the right spot is in that spiritual kingdom. And all of these other kingdoms that have ever been created or destroyed have the same issue, which is that disconnect between the rulers and those who are being ruled, which thankfully we don't have in the kingdom that we're in. So we see that throughout history. It's always been the same.
And I could even play the devil's advocate and say salvation is not free. I have to be obedient, don't I? I have to do something to get that salvation. It's given to me freely. And I receive it, I accept it by being obedient. Okay, we're running close on time. Let's see if we can get through a few more of these. Why were the tribes preserved for the son of Solomon? Basically, if you look at 1 Kings 11:32 through and 36, it says for David's sake. He had made a covenant with David, a promise to David. What promise was given to Jeroboam if he would keep the statutes and commandments of the Lord, which you've already heard he didn't keep those, but what was he going to do? God was going to help him by afflicting the seed of David, not forever, but for a while. When Solomon sought to slay Jeroboam, where did he flee? We covered this last week. Where did he go when he was threatened by Solomon? Egypt. What request did Jeroboam and the congregation of Israel make unto Rehoboam? And this is things that we just talked about. Lighten their burden, lighten their yoke. And what advice did the old men give to Rehoboam? Said, be a servant to the people, and the people will be a servant to you. It's strange that Jeremy and I were talking before class when I was in the military, which seems like 100 years ago. I was always taught that in the senior positions, that if anything good happened, you give the credit to the people that work for you. If anything bad happened, you took the responsibility. You never chastised in public, you always praised in public. If there was any chastising or any counseling to be done, it was done in private. We don't see that today, do we? If we look at our federal government today, what do we see? Everybody airing their dirty laundry out before the event even ends most of the time. So what that has to do with this is that the older folks, if he had listened to the older folks and been a servant to them instead of a harsh taskmaster, things would have gone differently. What was Rehoboam's answer to Jeroboam and all the people? And I just answered that. Things would be a lot worse. So what did Israel do when the king did not hearken unto them? That's when they rebelled. That's when the final act took place that was going to divide the nation. And Jeroboam was made king over the northern tribes. Whom did Rehoboam assemble to fight against the house of Israel? When they rebelled and Jeroboam was going to be king over those northern tribes, who did Rehoboam gather together and was going to go fight with them? Judah and Benjamin. He got the people from Judah and Benjamin to do that. And then the last question is, what did the prophet Shemaiah tell Rehoboam? And this has to do with the question about going up and fighting with them. What did the prophet tell him not to do? Not to go up and fight. We'll pick up with third lesson next week. Thank y'all so much.